From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Hey, Matt, Ben, Noel. I apologize to the mysterious super producer, but I haven't quite remembered your name yet. I hope you're all doing all right during these really crazy times. So, I wanted to talk about how similarly relatable the Floridelis cult and how it sounds quite relatable to my experiences as a child and a teenager. Have you ever considered talking about the foster care system, or even the harrowing things that happen to a lot of kids in the system? I can say I met a lot of monsters under human skin and was both birthed and adopted by some pretty horrendous sociopaths. Perhaps you could even discuss narcissistic personality disorder, a very specific kind of sociopathy. Anyways, love your show. Keep up the fantastic work.
Wow. Okay. Obviously, thank you for the kind words that you put in there, whether or not they went to air. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening and for sending us this idea of discussing the foster care system specifically within the United States, but I'm sure examining that system in any country, you would find some stuff that they don't want you to know. You mentioned specifically something called narcissistic personality disorder, which is something you can find in statistic manuals that are used by psychiatrists and psychologists across the globe. And I guess we can just start there, maybe. Like, what does that mean? This term that you mentioned. We have talked about psychopathy and sociopathy. We've talked about these things before on this show numerous times, but this one I don't think we've actually covered. So let's just go to the Mayo Clinic to just to tell you what they say, at least. They describe it as one of several types of personality disorders. It's a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. But behind this mask of extreme confidence lies a fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable to the slightest criticism.
I would add that for people with NPD, relationships are all transactional. So you don't really regard other people as a person. They wouldn't have the right to exist as a person. You're the person in the world. And the idea that a friendship might exist is really defined by what they can do for that person, what transaction they can accomplish for that person with NPD, and also the idea of fragility of self-image ties into pretty often an overinflated sense of vengeance. Like even if a narcissist is dead in the wrong, and you point out, if they feel like they lose face, as is sometimes said culturally, then there will be a lot of energy put toward somehow, quote unquote, punishing the person who had the audacity to be right or point out whatever terrible thing the MPD individual was doing. There is one thing I want to point out here on MPD specifically. A lot of times there are children raised by parents with this condition who, the strangest things seem normal, right? Even when you're an adult, the most beautiful and most terrible things become normalized so quickly. When you're a child, you often don't have the wherewithal to realize that the way you are being raised is maybe not a healthy way, right? It's maybe not a way that you yourself would want to raise a child. And, it's only years later that people come to find as adults that what was happening to them was not right. And it was not good for you. So I'd like to recommend just at the top a resource, a subreddit actually, where you can share your stories. It's called Raised by Narcissists. So go to reddit.com/r/raised by narcissists, and you can find and share your stories. Now, please do not mistake that for medical advice. And please don't, presume to give people medical advice if you're not a doctor. But I think when you can feel so alone in the world, and especially if you're living with a 24/7 MPD, then it can be helpful to know that you are indeed not alone in one sense or another.
Thank you for doing that, Ben, and for providing that. And I think one of the most important parts of this is that each of us, no matter who you are, where you grew up, what those circumstances were unique to your experience, right? There is not a single other person that went through whatever it is that you went through, positive or negative, as a child. And now, whatever you're going through right now, nobody is exactly like you. But those commonalities that bring us together, I think, are sometimes the most important. Because, like you said, if you can find a subreddit of people who have been through something similar, and you can actually share with that is a great way to move forward if you're struggling with something. I just want to, it's kind of weird, I guess, that we started talking about this disorder, because really what we're talking about is who within the U.S. and the foster care system is eligible to take in a child. For the system to say, yes, we trust you in some way or at some level to take care of a child in all things, feeding, clothing, housing, caring for a child's emotional needs, which is maybe something that I don't want to say gets overlooked, because if you think about it this way, to have the number of children that enter the foster care system within the United States every year, there have to be an overwhelming number of good people who are trying to do good in what they are doing to take care of children. There just has to be. If I'm saying that as an opinion, just because to have in 2007 293,276 children entering the foster care system, and then having that number wavering between 290,000 to 200, and the lowest number was in 2012 when 251,352 children were entered into foster care within the United States. I mean, if you didn't have good people to a large extent taking care of these children, then I feel like we would see a very different general picture, maybe. And maybe I'm completely wrong because I'm so far removed from it and I just don't know yet. We haven't delved into the statistics and enough personal experiences yet. But I would just say, to take on a child that is not yours, to raise that child and take care of them, is a massive undertaking. And I don't know. I want to give props to foster parents out there who are doing good and know they're doing good.
Well, I can completely speak to that. My ex-wife's sister was a foster, and her husband were a foster family, and they adopted almost every single kid they took in as foster kids. So they now have this massive extended family, and they adopted 3 siblings who all, were separated under the foster care system initially, and then she, fostered them all together and then adopted them. So that's a success story, I would say. And there's obviously a big but here. That's why we're leading with this, right?
Well, I mean, there is a big but, because like our caller, there are so many reports of awful experiences within the system. And that doesn't mean, an individual parent adopting or parents like that, like your example, Noel, adopting. Sometimes it's just part of the system where so many children get adopted under one roof, the way we saw with the Fleur de Lis cult and in other places, in other instances. There's all kinds of abuse that can occur, whether it is making use of the money that is afforded to a family when they foster a child, the breaks that you can get on your taxes, and all these other things. There are ways to abuse the system. And as we've also seen throughout the history of this show, there's a cavalcade of ways to abuse a child with whom you're given guardianship.
True.
I don't even know what else to say. I haven't done enough looking into this. There's a Frontline piece from PBS looking at the child welfare system back in the 90s, and it was really focused on it, and it painted a pretty grim picture of what was going on.
Yeah, the statistics are troubling, and even just the cursory statistics prove that there are serious systemic problems with the foster care system. I have a little bit of personal experience, but more secondhand. I knew a lot of foster kids growing up, and in my times traveling around. So the thing is, we cannot speak to the foster system in other countries. We can speak a little bit in the U.S. because there's a lot of research that's been done. John Hopkins found that children in foster care are 4 times more likely to be abused sexually than a peer child in a non-foster care setting. Children in group homes are 28 times more likely to encounter abuse. We also know that researchers in New Jersey concluded no assurances can be given that any foster child in the state is safe. More than half of the trafficking victims that were children that were recovered through FBI raids in 2013 were from foster care or group homes. And there's an entire world. I mean, you can say this about so many things, but there's an entire world that most people will not know about here unless we have direct impact with it, or unless we know someone somehow. And we have to be very careful. And I appreciate that you're doing this, Matt, not to paint with a broad brush. We're not talking about these families. We're talking about a system that needs to do its best for some of the most vulnerable parts of the U.S. population. I mean, think about short stays alone, right? A short stay is where a child is removed from their home due to what authorities would consider a credible fear for their safety, but then returned within days. So think about that. If you're 5 years old, you think you've been kidnapped, right? No matter what those people say, you've been kidnapped and somehow returned. That's pretty traumatic for a kid to experience. And even when these people, these agencies have their best intentions, right? They're not really kidnapping kids. They're trying to keep kids in a safe place, but the damage is done. And with foster care, I think it's the right thing to do for us to do an episode on this.
Absolutely.
What do you guys think?
I'm going to consult with my wife, who is a school psychologist who deals with children who often have emotional or behavioral issues prior to being placed into a foster care system, where they are then living in extremely close contact with numerous, this is generally speaking, but numerous other children who also have emotional behavioral disorders. And when you create an ecosystem like that, a lot of times it's not even the foster parents or the people running whatever the foster home is that are doing the abusing, because it's again, it's so much of our behavior as humans is learned, and we're going to get into some really seriously dark topics when we do this episode, and I hope you'll come with us, but also, hopefully we can maintain at least that sense that there could be a positive way through.
I think at the end of the day too, I mean, it's just about One thing that I think is huge is that they're very vulnerable to things like trafficking, like human trafficking, because of their unstable upbringing. Often that they can be easy prey. Not to say that the foster parents themselves are doing this at all. It just could be they run away, or they are putting themselves in risky situations, and maybe they're targeted in that way. But there's certainly other aspects to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many issues. I guess what I was just getting at, Noel, is just saying that the children themselves may find you or someone entering, and it's so hard to generalize like this because every single person has had a different experience in the foster care system. It's just stories that I've heard come through that sometimes it is the kids themselves who, because of what they have experienced, reflect some of the emotional, mental, physical abuse on their surroundings, no matter what their surroundings are. And when their surroundings are other kids who are also vulnerable, it just becomes a really messed up cycle. I'm not going to cry talking about this, but there's so many really heart-wrenching stories that have come out of the foster care system, specifically in Atlanta. My God.